Every man who has ever chased a woman and watched her pull further away already knows the truth on some level. The harder you reach, the faster it recedes. The more available you make yourself, the less anyone values the access. Not because she is cruel, but because human desire has a specific architecture. Machiavelli spent his life studying it. Value is never self-evident. It is always perceived. And perception is governed by scarcity, by mystery, by the signal of a man so invested in his own direction, that whether she is paying attention simply does not feel urgent. That man does not chase. And that is precisely why she cannot stop thinking about him. What follows is the complete framework, 5 interconnected principles that, when genuinely embodied rather than performed, change the dynamic of attraction at its root. First, scarcity is the foundation of value. The single most common mistake men make in attraction is this. They believe that more effort produces more desire, more texts, more compliments, more time, more availability, more proof that they are interested. They believe this accumulation of effort communicates value. What it actually communicates is the opposite. It communicates that access to them is unlimited, that their attention is infinitely available, and that no particular behavior on her part is required to maintain it. And things that are infinitely available do not produce desire. They produce comfort at best and indifference at worst. This is not a modern observation. Machiavelli wrote that men judge far more by appearances than by reality. That perception is the actual currency of influence, and that what people perceive to be rare, they instinctively assign higher value. The principle of scarcity is one of the most consistently replicated findings in social psychology. When people believe something is limited, whether that is a resource, an opportunity, or a person's time and attention, their brain registers it as more valuable than an identical thing that appears freely available. This is not a flaw in human reasoning. It is a feature of how value is assessed in a world where everything competes for attention and not everything can be prioritized equally. Applied to attraction, the implication is straightforward. A man whose time is visibly structured around his own life, whose attention is not distributed freely to whoever requests it, whose engagement is deliberate rather than compulsive, that man communicates something about himself that no amount of charm or effort can substitute for. He communicates that access to him means something, that it was not simply given because he had nothing better to do with it, that she is receiving something that is not available to everyone who expresses interest. And that perception, once established, creates a pull that operates below the level of conscious thought. She finds herself thinking about him more, reaching out more, making herself more available, not because he asked her to, and not because she decided to strategically, but because her brain responded exactly as human brains respond to scarcity, with intensified interest. The important clarification here is that scarcity built on emptiness produces nothing. A man who is absent because he is nowhere to be, and unavailable because nothing is demanding his time, is not creating real scarcity. He is performing it, and the performance is always visible. What creates genuine scarcity is genuine investment in your own life. Goals that actually consume your energy, work that actually matters to you, a standard for how your time is spent that applies consistently, not selectively based on who is watching. When your unavailability is real, when it is the natural result of a life that is actually full rather than a tactic deployed to seem interesting, it communicates something at a frequency that performed unavailability never reaches. Second, presence communicates what words cannot. Most men approach attraction as a verbal project. They focus on what to say, how to say it, when to say it, and how to recover when something lands wrong. They treat conversation as the primary channel through which attraction flows. And while communication matters, this framing misses the layer beneath language that actually governs how people are experienced by others. Women and people generally read the nonverbal signal of another person with a precision that is largely unconscious and almost entirely accurate. The way a man moves, the way he occupies space, the quality of his attention when he is listening, whether his composure is genuine or whether there is a current of anxiety running beneath a performed surface. These signals are processed continuously, and they communicate something that words actively cannot, not because words are insufficient, but because the nonverbal layer is faster and more trusted. The body does not lie in the ways language can, and so a man whose presence communicates genuine self-possession, whose stillness is real, whose attention is genuinely in the room and not split between the conversation and a background calculation of how he is being received, registers at a level that no carefully constructed sentence can replicate. Marcus Aurelius wrote that a man should stop arguing about what a good man is and simply be one. The principle applies directly here. Stop trying to communicate confidence through words. Embody it through how you are in the room. Machiavelli understood this as the difference between influence that requires constant effort and influence that operates continuously without effort, the difference between forcing a result and creating the conditions under which the result arrives naturally. Presence in the context of attraction is also emotional composure. A man who reacts to every small friction, who shows anxiety through the speed of his responses, who adjusts his behavior visibly based on how he thinks she is feeling about him in a given moment. This man is communicating to every one of those adjustments that his internal state is contingent on her reactions, that her approval or disapproval directly governs his experience of the interaction, that the information that she holds, the emotional leverage, arrives to her not as something she consciously analyzes, but as something she simply feels. And what it produces is not attraction. It produces the particular kind of comfortable disregard that people have for things they know they can affect at will. The man with genuine presence is different in a way that is immediately felt even when it cannot be immediately articulated. He is in the conversation without being consumed by it. He is interested without being anxious. His attention feels like a choice rather than a default, and that quality, the quality of a man whose inner state does not visibly fluctuate with the temperature of her responses, creates something in her that attention-seeking behavior actively destroys. It creates curiosity about what is behind the composure. It creates the desire to be the thing that actually moves him, because it is already evident that most things do not. Third, standards and boundaries are not barriers. They are signals. There is a persistent misunderstanding among men about what boundaries communicate in the context of attraction. The fear is that setting limits, protecting time, or declining to accommodate requests that conflict with your own priorities will read as coldness or disinterest, that it will push her away rather than draw her in. This fear is precisely backwards, and it is built on the assumption that attraction is proportional to how much you are willing to do. It is not. Attraction is proportional to how much you are perceived to be worth, and what you are willing to tolerate or not tolerate is one of the most reliable signals of how you value yourself. Machiavelli observed that making your presence felt by demonstrating you can withdraw it is one of the fundamental tools of influence, not as a petty game, not as a manipulation tactic, but as the natural behavior of a person who understands their own value and does not feel any particular compulsion to override it for the sake of maintaining another person's comfort. When a man declines to make himself perpetually available, when he enforces a standard about how his time is used and does not apologize for that standard, when he is visibly unbothered by the possibility that this might disappoint her. He is communicating a fact about himself that no amount of self-description could convey as credibly. He is demonstrating that he has self-respect, and self-respect, in a landscape where most men are willing to abandon it on request, is genuinely rare. What boundaries create, practically, is a comparison effect. When she has encountered men who restructured their entire schedule around her availability, who answered every message within minutes regardless of what they were doing, who treated her attention as the organizing principle of their day, and then she encounters a man who does none of those things, not because he is punishing her or playing games, but because his life has its own structure and she is welcome to fit into it if she chooses. The contrast is immediate and significant. She does not experience it as rejection. She experiences it as encountering someone who operates differently than what she is used to. And people are instinctively drawn to what is unfamiliar in a particular way, not with the discomfort of something alien, but with the curiosity of something they have not encountered before and want to understand better. The deeper function of standards is that they protect the quality of your own experience, which in turn protects the quality of what you project. A man who has no standards spends significant energy managing the effects of situations you should have declined to participate in. That energy expenditure shows. It shows in a low-level preoccupation that leaks into interactions. It shows in a scarcity of genuine focus. It shows in the quality of presence he brings, which is always slightly diluted by the background noise of situations he said yes to when he should have said no. A man with clear standards, enforced consistently, conserves that energy and channels it into his own development. The result is a version of him that is more present, more focused, and more genuinely interesting than the version that was trying to be endlessly accommodating. Fourth, purpose makes you unpredictable in exactly the right way. Predictability is the enemy of sustained attraction, not unpredictability manufactured for effect, the kind that involves deliberate inconsistency designed to keep someone off balance, but the natural unpredictability of a man whose primary investment is in his own direction rather than in managing how he is perceived, a man whose next move is genuinely governed by his own priorities, values, and goals rather than by the question of how she will respond to it, is a man whose behavior cannot be fully anticipated, and behavior that cannot be fully anticipated holds attention in a way that fully predictable behavior simply does not. Nietzsche wrote that a man who has a genuine reason for living can endure almost anything. The psychological reality behind that observation is that a man with a compelling purpose develops a quality of focus and self-direction that is visible in everything about how he carries himself. His decisions are not primarily reactive. He is not reshaping his plans based on her availability or her interest level. He is not monitoring her responses as the primary feedback mechanism for his sense of direction. He has a trajectory, and she is encountering that trajectory. She is not the origin of it, and she is not the arbiter of where it goes. That position, the position of a man already in motion on a path that matters to him, is deeply compelling in a way that the position of a man waiting to see how she feels about him simply cannot be. Machiavelli's observation that a man who controls his own destiny commands natural influence is not merely a political principle. It describes the precise psychological mechanism through which a man with genuine purpose affects the people around him. She senses that his life has weight and structure independent of her presence in it. She senses that he cannot be redirected by her moods, her tests, or her intermittent interest. She senses that there is something building in him that she does not fully understand and cannot fully access. And that combination of visible forward motion, self-directed focus, and the specific mystery of a life that has its own logic triggers the kind of fascination that casual attraction does not produce. Purpose also changes your relationship to the outcome of any particular interaction. A man invested in something larger than whether this specific woman is impressed by him tonight has a particular quality of ease that is impossible to fake. He is genuinely less concerned with the result because the result, whatever it is, does not determine whether his life is going somewhere. That ease, that capacity to be fully present in an interaction while simultaneously being entirely unattached to its outcome, is one of the most attractive qualities a person can carry. It communicates abundance. It communicates that access to him is an addition to a life that is already complete, not a solution to a life that is waiting for something external to make it worth living. Synthesized successfully. Fifth, the subtle pull operates below the level of conscious thought. Everything discussed so far, scarcity, presence, boundaries, purpose, converges in the final principle, which is that genuine attraction at its deepest level does not operate through persuasion. It operates through the invisible accumulation of signals that her mind processes continuously and largely without her awareness. The conclusion that emerges from those signals, the feeling that he is different in a way she cannot fully articulate, that there is something about him she cannot completely decode, that she finds herself thinking about him at times when she had no intention of thinking about him, arise not as a decision but as a sensation, and sensations are not argued out of existence. They simply exist, and they generate behavior. Machiavelli wrote that the most durable influence is invisible, that the strongest power is not felt as power at all, but simply as the natural arrangement of things. The principle translates precisely when a man embodies the qualities described in this framework. The attraction she develops does not feel to her like a response to strategy. It feels like her own genuine interest in a particular person. That is not a manipulation. That is the natural result of encountering someone whose internal architecture is genuinely different from what she encounters in most men. She is not being tricked into chasing him. She is responding honestly to something real, the Zeigarnik effect, the psychological principle that the human mind fixates on incomplete patterns and seeks resolution. Explains part of the mechanism. When a man reveals enough of himself to be interesting, but not so much that he is completely legible, her mind continues to engage with him in his absence, working to complete the picture. This is not manufactured mystery for its own sake. It is the natural result of a man who does not feel compelled to explain himself fully, justify himself continuously, or ensure that she has complete access to his inner world at all times. The incompleteness is real because the self-possession is real. He is not withholding. He simply does not experience the need to give everything away as the default condition of interacting with someone he is interested in. Timing amplifies everything. The space between interactions is not dead time. It is time during which your mind, left without new inputs, works with the impressions that have already been made. A man who floods that space with constant messages, constant check-ins, constant attempts to maintain presence in her awareness, short-circuits this process entirely. He eliminates the space in which your natural interest would otherwise build. The man who allows genuine intervals between interactions, not as a tactic, but as the natural rhythm of a life that has other demands and priorities, gives her mind room to do exactly what it will do when it encounters someone genuinely compelling. It continues thinking about him. The integration of all five principles is what produces the irreplaceable quality that the most compelling men possess. No single element produces it alone. Scarcity without genuine presence reads as unavailability. Presence without purpose reads as attention-seeking with better packaging. Purpose without boundaries reads as a man too busy for connection. Boundaries without genuine warmth read as coldness. But when a man has genuinely invested in developing all of these, when he is a life that is actually full, presence that is actually grounded, standards that are actually enforced, purpose that is actually compelling, and a quality of engagement that is warm but not desperate. The combination produces something that is, in the most precise sense of the word, rare, and rare things are valued, and valued things are pursued. The man she cannot replace. The end point of this entire framework is not a tactic or a behavior modification. It is a transformation in how a man relates to himself and to the direction of his own life. The man who embodies these principles does not become attractive by doing different things. He becomes attractive by becoming a different kind of person, the kind whose internal completeness is visible in every interaction, whose self-respect is non-negotiable, whose attention is a genuine signal of value because it was not freely distributed to everyone who expressed interest. Machiavelli's deepest insight was never about domination or manipulation. It was about mastery, the specific kind of mastery that begins with a man's relationship to himself and radiates outward from there. The man who has mastered his own emotions, structured his own time, invested in his own direction, and developed the capacity to hold his own center without external validation is not trying to be attractive. He simply is. And that difference between performing the qualities of a high-value man and actually being one is the only difference that produces lasting results rather than temporary impressions. She will not chase you because you deployed the right sequence of behaviors. She will chase you because you became someone she genuinely does not want to lose. Not because you told her you were valuable, but because every interaction, every absence, every demonstration of where your priorities actually lie communicated it more credibly than any words could. That is the strategy, not a trick, not a game. A way of being that makes the outcome you want the natural consequence of who you have become. Become that man, everything else follows. What most men get wrong about this framework: there is a specific misreading of everything described above that is worth addressing directly, because it is the misreading that produces the worst possible version of these principles in practice. Some men hear a framework like this and translate it into a performance. They become unavailable not because their life is genuinely full, but because they calculated that unavailability produces interest. They enforce standards not because those standards reflect genuine values, but because they read that standards increase perceived value. They project calm not because they have done the internal work of developing genuine composure, but because they believe calm appearance generates attraction. And in every case, the performance fails. Not immediately, not always visibly, but inevitably. Because human beings are exquisitely sensitive to the difference between something that is real and something that is constructed to produce an effect. Machiavelli himself was precise about this distinction. He wrote about the prince who genuinely embodies the qualities that command respect and the prince who merely performs them. And he was clear that the performance, while sometimes temporarily effective, is always ultimately fragile. The genuine article is durable because it does not require maintenance. It is simply what is there. The performance requires constant management and is perpetually vulnerable to moments of pressure where the real thing beneath it surfaces. The framework in this video is not a series of behaviors to add on top of who you currently are. It is a description of the man who results from genuine investment in your own development, your own emotional regulation, your own sense of direction, your own willingness to hold standards that cost you something in the short term because you understand what they build over time. That investment is the actual work. The attraction is the natural consequence of the work, not a goal to be engineered. Through surface-level behavioral changes, the man who does this genuinely, who builds a life that is actually compelling, develops composure that is actually grounded, holds standards that he actually believes in, and invests in a purpose that actually matters to him, does not need to think very much about whether these principles are working. The results emerge on their own. in the natural course of his interactions with people who sense the difference between a man who has done the work and a man who is attempting to simulate having done it. Why this approach works long-term. Short-term attraction and sustained pursuit are produced by different things. A man can generate brief interest through novelty, through surface-level charm, through the initial impression of qualities he does not actually possess. But sustained pursuit, the kind that persists over time, that intensifies rather than diminishes, that produces the specific experience of feeling genuinely irreplaceable to someone, requires the real architecture described here, not because she is running a rigorous evaluation, but because sustained exposure to a person reveals what is genuine and what is not, and what is genuine holds. What was performed dissolves. A man who has genuinely built himself, who has done the internal work, developed the real presence, established the actual standards, and invested in the real purpose, becomes more compelling over time rather than less, because every interaction adds to a picture that is consistent and deepening rather than a picture that slowly diverges from the impression he was trying to create. She does not eventually discover that the early version of him was more impressive than the current one. She discovers the opposite. The early version was already interesting. The ongoing version keeps revealing depth she had not yet encountered. That dynamic of a man who continues to be genuinely worth knowing, worth pursuing, worth staying oriented toward, is not manufactured. It is the natural result of actually being that man rather than pretending to be him for long enough to produce the desired response. And that is ultimately the most honest articulation of everything in this framework. It is not a strategy for how to seem like someone worth pursuing. It is a description of how to actually become that person. The pursuit that results is not a trick. It is a genuine response to something real. And genuine responses to real things last in a way that responses to performances never will. The single shift that changes everything. If there is one thing to take from everything covered in this video, it is this: the entire dynamic of attraction shifts the moment a man stops organizing his life around whether someone is impressed by him and starts organizing it around whether he is becoming the person he intends to be. That sounds simple. It is not easy, because the pull toward external validation is deeply wired into most men, wired in through years of being evaluated, through the conditioning of social environments that rewarded performance and punished authenticity, through the accumulated habit of checking faces for approval before deciding how to feel about a situation, unwiring that does not happen through intellectual understanding alone. It happens through the slow, consistent, sometimes uncomfortable practice of making decisions based on internal standards rather than anticipated external reactions, over and over, in small situations and large ones, until the internal compass becomes the primary reference point and the external one becomes secondary. When that shift completes, or even begins to complete, everything described in this video follows naturally. The scarcity is real because the life is genuinely full. The presence is real because the internal noise has quieted. The boundaries are real because the standards are genuinely held. The purpose is real because the direction is genuinely chosen. And the subtle pull, the quality of magnetic influence that draws people in without effort or performance, is real because it is simply the natural projection of a man who has become, through genuine work, someone worth being drawn toward. That man does not chase, he does not need to. And she does not decide to chase him, she simply finds, without quite being able to explain why, that she cannot stop. Most men spend their entire lives trying to be chosen. The man who stops trying to be chosen and starts becoming genuinely worth choosing discovers something the other men never. Well, that the pursuit he was working so hard to manufacture was always the natural result of something he simply had not yet built. Build it. The rest takes care of itself.